Children are going to learn to communicate better in the context of being seen, feeling like they belong, feeling like they're listened to. Echolalia is a term given for when usually children repeat phrases back, either immediately, like repeating what you said right back to them, or repeating a phrase they've heard somewhere at a later point. Sometimes it could seem within context, or sometimes not at all. At the last primary school I worked at, there's a few children who were echolalic. I remember one boy, I think he was 5, who every time he was getting frustrated with trying to fit some toys together, like train tracks, or he couldn't get his shoes on, he would say, "Don't get stuck, don't get stuck." At first that could be confusing, but after getting to know him more, it was clear he was getting frustrated and he wanted some help, but he wasn't saying, "I need help." And I would reckon that at some point when he needed help with shoes or something, or he got some help from somebody, the adult telling him was saying, "Oh, don't get stuck," or something. And and so that became the phrase he would use. Echolalia is very connected to something called gestalt language processing. Gestalt basically means whole or chunk. Most children probably learn things word by word, and they build up sentences, and that's how we're used to like children developing their language. But a number of children, many autistic children, but you don't necessarily have to be autistic for this. They take language in chunks and phrases or songs, and it's very, very hard for them to piece out word by word. They can absolutely get to a good place where they can communicate what they need or what they're interested in and build relationships with people. But a lot of adult misunderstanding can unfortunately work against helping them get there. If a child is not talking much, or they're only talking in phrases, certain phrases from a show, or certain phrases that don't seem to have much to do with the context they're in, um, they think, "Oh, they're not speaking right, so we need to like go a few steps back and talk to them like they're 2 years younger." Um, Sorry, my cat's here. I'm gonna put him down. Oh, there he goes. We're going to speak to them that they're a bit like they're younger, so we have to like go back to speaking in one word or two word sentences. And what I've learned from people really pioneering the work in Gestalt language theory, especially a woman at the Meaningful Speech account on Instagram, is we don't need to be like fighting against the way they learn language. If some children learn language in chunks and phrases, give them more chunks and phrases or scripts that they can use, and yeah, don't fight against it. It takes some like some unlearning and some relearning. I know it's true for myself and other adults, but it's very much worth it. Whether you have a child or you're working with a child who's echolalic or has other communication differences, never assume that they're not listening to you or observing you and taking things in. Or if your child isn't speaking much, we really can't assume that a child who isn't speaking isn't intelligent or isn't aware of what's going on. There's countless examples of autistic adults. As an adult, they've later said that, like they well knew how people were talking about them when they're there, or assuming that they can't be interacted with. So the biggest piece of advice that's given is to not ignore it, not ignore echolalia, even if you don't understand it at the time, even if it doesn't make much sense. As much as possible, like acknowledge it, repeat it back to them, and because whether a child has communication differences or not, all children do want to be in relationships. They do want to communicate with others. So yeah, acknowledge it as much as possible. Don't ignore it. If need be, try to like do some detective work about like if there's a phrase that you don't know what they're trying to say, maybe another adult in their life knows like, "Oh, I said that to them when they really wanted chocolate ice cream," or something. Like, so talk with the adults in the kid's life, and maybe you could all figure out what the certain phrases mean. So something I did at the last job I was in at the primary school, when I was beginning to learn this stuff, I'm no expert in it, is model, like if I knew a child loved to do bubbles or loved to do certain type of wooden blocks, like a few years ago I probably would have like to prompt them to ask for it, like say, can I have the bubbles or something? But if I know, like, if they're reaching for it and if they're saying something or not saying something, just modeling, like, let's play bubbles or let's play Legos. Modeling that in an unpressurized way, having a good relationship with a child. Just the more I understood, like, if a children picks up languages in chunks, having a good relationship with them, low pressure, modeling useful phrases that eventually could be recombined is worth doing. Advice that I've started to take on for myself is to learn more about it. I'm going on Google, learning up gestalt language processing, looking up meaningful speech on Instagram. She's really taking a big lead in continuing this sort of understanding of gestalt language processing. It'll be very much worth it. And be willing to unlearn some things about our assumptions about how children learn language, and realize there's a number of children who learn language differently than I might have. Doing some homework, having a bit of humility has been very useful for me.
Do we have links down below?
Yes, you can look. We can check out some good links down below. It's stuff that I've looked at in the past 2 years, and honestly, like, if you're any context, if you have a child who's echolalic or doesn't speak much, or at all, or you work with such a child, I can't recommend it enough. No matter people's communication differences or styles, like, we're social creatures, and that's true for all children. We're social beings. Children want to communicate with people. They want to have relationships with people. Sometimes we have to meet them more than halfway, but we're the adults, so that's on us.